To build your own computer, you'll need a case, motherboard, CPU, CPU cooler, power supply, fans, storage, memory, thermal paste, and a graphics card. Start by removing the side panels of your case and putting them somewhere safe. Remove the motherboard from its box and set aside the anti-static bag and papers. The top of the box is a safe place to work on the motherboard, and I'm going to start there. The Central Processing Unit, or CPU, is the brain of our computer. Most of the time your CPU includes a cooler, like this one, but I've chosen to go with an upgraded liquid cooling unit, so I'll just put this to the side. The first thing to do is install the CPU. This involves carefully placing it in the CPU socket and using a lever to lock it in place. Next, I'll install memory sticks. These fit into memory sockets on the motherboard, and clips on the side snap shut when everything is correct.
Check this out, guys. We are getting in excess of 200 and we finish up with. That's for a very good reason. A means that you don't have to.
The storage I've chosen for this computer is an M.2 solid-state drive, which means it has no moving parts. It installs directly under the motherboard, under an included heatsink. Once we finish this step, it's time to go ahead and put the motherboard in the case. It screws into what are called standoff screws that keeps it about 6 millimeters off the case. Now that the motherboard is installed, we can move on to the CPU cooler. The cooler has a pump that delivers cold water to the CPU and sends hot water to a radiator. The radiator is directly cooled by two fans. Before installing the cooler, we need to put thermal paste on the CPU. This allows for heat to efficiently transfer from the CPU to the copper plate on the cooler. Once tightened down, the paste will spread out and cover most of the CPU. We've nearly installed all our hardware, and it's a good time to plug in loose cables. The last big piece of hardware is the graphics card, which acts as a second brain, specifically for creating everything we see on screen. So things didn't go quite to plan, and when I turned on my computer, I realized that one of my parts was having a serious problem and was defective. Hours of testing later, I realized that the motherboard was the issue, and I took apart everything I had just done, packed up the motherboard, and ordered a new one. And when that arrived, a couple days later, I got back to work, put everything back together, and that's where we begin right now. Before installing the power supply, I wanted to check that everything was working, so I hooked it up outside the system. PC builders have been putting lights in their computers for years, but addressable RGB LED lighting has only been popular for the past 5 or so. They don't make it run any faster, but they are fun to look at. Once I was sure everything was working properly, I installed the power supply and the case fans. Because I want the inside of my computer to look very clean, it was important to carefully hide the cables behind the motherboard panel. At this point, all that's left to do is reattach the front and side panels. Building your own PC is a great way to learn about how computers work, but it can be more challenging than it looks. If you're interested in building computers, an excellent place to start is PC Building Simulator, available on Steam. It's educational, accurate, and most of all, lots of fun.